Did you read all this crap and understand it?
Well, I read it all and I understood the basics of it, but I didn't print it out because my printer would die if I printed out too much.
Yeah. How much was it?
And we have family in town, so I didn't look at it. I said,
Here, we can share. I printed it out.
Wake up.
Morning.
Thank you. I need it.
I need to print out what they wrote.
Good morning. The Utility Advisory Board to the City of Punta Gorda is now in session for hearing and consideration of the matters that were on the publicly issued agenda. First item is roll call, please.
Pascal Rudd,
Here.
Christopher Flom,
Here.
Paul Jones,
Yeah.
James Hoffman,
Here.
Mike Dougherty,
Here.
Cynthia Blondin, Bill Tucker.
Here. The next scheduled meeting is January the 27th, 2020. Tom, are there any interferences with your calendars?
Nope.
Anybody on the committee have any concerns with that date? Okay,
Okay.
we'll go with that. Thank you. Are there any comments from citizens related to agenda items? Any member of the citizenry? You don't have to actually have elected. You don't even have to be, voted. You don't have to be, you have to pay your taxes, I think.
Yeah.
Let the record show there's no comments from citizens at this time. Approval of minutes.
So moved. Second.
It's been moved and seconded that the minutes of the meeting in November 25 be approved. All in favor say, oh, is there any discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All against say no. Unanimous, thank you. A little off-agenda item I'd like to bring up. Tom, we've got a problem that I need to bring up with you, and it has to do with having too damn many birthdays. Yours happens to be the one today. Happy
Right.
birthday from all of us.
Thank you, thank you.
Is there anything you'd like to tell us with your wisdom of another added year?
Yeah, I'm actually, I am legal retirement age in the eyes of the Social Security Department, so the national deficit's going to go up because I'm getting a check this month.
And you're going to share it?
No.
Mr. Chairman, I had one more thing to add to our informal agenda item. Tom, I knew it was your birthday. I didn't know what to get you, but I thought we'd get you a little something. And other people that you may run into today may not know that it's your birthday, but I figured this gift will help them to understand that it is in fact your birthday. I hope it won't mess up your hair too bad, but
Oh, my.
I didn't want to do too much.
Oh, my.
There you go.
Thank you.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. I love it.
I had one other item which I gave some thought to, and thought, well, Tom might like this, and it goes right along with what we do here, because it's, if you don't know, it goes well with water. And water is, something that we all use all the time, and if you use this correctly, you will smell like an orange blossom.
Thank
I
you.
didn't go overboard, but happy
Thank
birthday.
you. Thank you.
Happy birthday, Tom.
Thank you very much. I was in Indianapolis over the holidays, and all the water up there was frozen. So it's nice to.
That's
nice
why
to
you're
have
here,
real
isn't it?
water. Thank you very much.
Would
I
you like
guess
to
with
start
that-
us off? Yeah.
Yes, I will. Tom Jackson for the record. As you can see before you, our reservoir stage height. And again, for some of the folks in the audience that don't know, the green line represents the record high on these days. The yellow line is current conditions. And as you can see, we're below the 50-year average, which is the magenta sort of line. That's our 50-year average. We're below the 50-year average, and we're at no flow conditions. However, since this graph, this represents through the end of November until December the 1st, we've had some pretty good rains as a result of these cold fronts coming through. I think you'll see next month that the reservoir situation looks better. Again, with the Phase 1A interconnect. This is less problematic for the city than it was many years ago, but we still get concerned when the reservoir reaches no flow and the stage gets down this low. The blue line represents the record low for the period of record, which is 50 years. So we're just a little bit below average, nothing to worry about yet. Any questions on that? Because I've had a birthday, I have to put my glasses on. As you can see for November, and you have this in your packet, and it's kind of hard to read on the screen, but for November 2019, our raw water withdrawals were 175.7 million gallons, with a peak day of 6.78 million gallons. We are done with ASR. When I redo this sheet for the new year, I'll remove that column because our ASR are now production wells in the process of being converted to production wells. The Peace River Minnesota Regional Water Supply Phase 1A pipeline, we received from them 32.9 million gallons of water through the pipeline. And I'll explain that a little bit for the new board members. We have to keep that pipeline fresh. So typically we transfer about 500,000 gallons back and forth a day just to keep that pipeline fresh. However, our TDS is not meeting standards. So when our TDS is elevated and we're not meeting standards, we cannot send water to them because that's a violation. We have to take the water from them. What'll happen is when the rainy season, or now in our case now, when the RO plant starts up and our TDS meets standards, then we'll make that water up. We'll send it back to them. But we received 32.9 million gallons. Our water to town was 164.65 million gallons with an average day of 5.48 million gallons and a peak day of 6.37 million gallons. Our wastewater flows were 72.4 million gallons with an average of 2.4 million gallons, a 3-month rolling average of 2.3 million gallons, and a peak day of 2.7 million gallons. As I showed in the reservoir stage height, rainfall is down. We saw 0.8 of an inch of rain in the month of November. Our typical rainfall for November is 1.59 inches. As Bill Harper would say, November is the driest month in Punta Gorda historically, and we're at about half of that dry rate. So again, that is why our reservoir stage height looks as it does. Any questions on that?
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Something I've forgotten I should know. What is the capacity of the 1A line?
2 MGD, 2 million gallons. 4
We
million
got one
gallons.
guess.
I think it's 4.
I'm sorry, probably 4.
It's 4.
And
I had it right, and then I looked, and he said 2. It was 4.
that's the way Steve is.
Yeah, 2 million gallons, 4 million gallons.
Thank you, Steve. And the 1A, what will be that capacity?
The new one will also be 4.
And will we have to refresh that one?
Yes. What we plan to do, because of the RO plant, the strategy right now is to receive water from the authority through the new pipeline, the Phase 1 pipeline, and send it back to them at the same time through the 1A. So it'll become a loop through our plant back out.
Thank you.
Yes. And finally, for my reports, agenda items on City Council, November 20th, we awarded a master agreement and specific authorization 1 to Carollo Engineers to do for water supply planning and all things water related. They are typically our engineer of record for the water plant. Yes, sir.
Did we ever see that contract?
I don't believe so.
Thank you.
It was a renewal. They're in our engineering library. I'll put it on the agenda for next time.
No,
I'm
I
more
just
than happy
wanted to know if it ever came before us.
No. Any questions on that?
No.
Okay. And with that, I'll turn it over to Krista.
Good morning, Kristen Simeon, Finance. I sent you out the October and November financials yesterday. Sorry for the delay. We'll hopefully get back on track now that we're all caught up. We'll go over November, but we can always look back at October if you want. So starting with the main page, you can see year-to-date estimated revenues and where we're at. So again, we're doing very well for charges for service. We're at 116% overall. And expenditures are doing really well. The one I want to point out is the transfer to construction fund. Again, we're working on our RO plant, still sending for reimbursements and draws on our grants and SRF loan and awaiting. So we did have to increase that another 1.7 million. That's in addition to the 5 that we were at for September. We didn't have to increase it in October, and now we have it in November. We did just receive 1.8 million from SwiftMud in December, and we're still waiting for some loan draws from the SRF.
So it's all internal system lag. and-
Timing, because we have to expend it before they'll reimburse, and there's, tons of paperwork, 1,000 pages of paperwork that we're sending in, yes.
There's one thing I just can't understand. Never can, never have, never will.
Okay.
Projected carryover ending.
Mm-hmm.
The budget was 4.2 million. The original budget was 9.2.
We had to make that adjustment because at the end of September, if you recall, we had to do that transfer for $5 million for the RO while we're waiting for some grant revenue.
Okay, and then there
It will
was,
come back to the fund.
they just borrowed it. That's okay.
Yes.
Do we have an IOU?
Yes, we do.
And there was a similar thing, if I could find it.
It'll be on the next page as well.
Okay,
That's where the footnote is.
Right,
Footnote number 3.
which I didn't understand. All right, the other one was the revenue report. And it's carryover beginning. And it's almost a $5 million difference. That's the same $5 million we have the IOU for.
Yes, so our beginning carryover is $5 million less because we had to borrow it in September. So we really didn't start out at 9 million for the year. We're starting out at 4.2 million. And then when it gets repaid back, it'll be adjusted.
And that's
But-
why there's
Then that's
a
why it's
negative
beginning and
number.
ending is offset by the same amount.
Is there a balance sheet
Mm-hmm.
somewhere? I've never seen a real balance sheet.
Yeah, so we do a CAFR every year, but that takes all the utility funds and combines them. But we could also do one for you for just the one fund if you want.
Well, what I'm thinking is I have no idea what the rate base is.
Mm-hmm.
For example, for the utility department, I've never seen a document in my 6 or so years on this board that shows us what our rate base is. I've never seen a flow of funds statement. But the balance sheet would be particularly important because it would show what we have built, what our associated borrowings are.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen anything like that.
We do have it annually in our CAFR, so I can provide you all that.
But we don't do it monthly
We don't do it monthly, no.
or quarterly?
No, we have monthly reports that we run, but they're not always adjusted for gap entries, that kind of thing. So, but we do have that information monthly.
That might be nice to see quarterly. I don't know, Mr. Chairman, what do you think?
I think we could all think about it.
We've been thinking about it for several years.
Well,
Okay.
there's no sense rushing into this.
But I will provide you all the CAFRs for
It's a
however,
stable municipal system.
we do have it on our
Thanks, Chris.
website as well, the CAFRs, but we can just pull out the utilities information if you want. I mean, you'll see other funds there as well, but
No, I'm okay with the annual CAFR.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing that up.
okay. So again, we did have a spike in our water billings in October, and then it went back down to a more normal where we would expect it to be. So for the year, for the 2 months, we're at 123% for water billings and 105% for sewer billings. And when we compare it to last year, we're about 269,000 over, and that's all related to the October spike. So,
Do we know what caused it? It's 50%.
yeah, I mean, we don't have, I mean, just showing the billings, we'll check into it and see if there's anything unusual, but usually, like, if there's a big spike in a customer account, they're calling, so,
Well, yeah, 300 and some odd thousand, about 300,000 bucks is a lot of
I
money.
mean, as, Tom had mentioned, there has been, lower rainfall than expected, so I'm not sure if that plays into it.
I've seen this happen in other communities when all the water meters get changed out. It's a similar
Sometimes you
situation.
see a little bit
where you see
extra.
a change because the meters are actually recording correctly and things kind of jump up a little.
Yeah, we did ours, over time, but it could be something like that as well. But comparing it to last year, it is a spike. And we've seen spikes before, and then we sometimes see a correction later in the year. But as of right now, we haven't had any major one account that had a huge spike, or something like that, so. Operating expenditures are about 91% through the year. We have approximately almost 800,000 in encumbrances. In prior year, purchase orders were 158,000. So those are for POs that were already in place where we hadn't received. Okay. Make this one a little smaller. And again, this chart is just comparing revenues and expenditures, and the graphs kind of show you where we were last year and where we are at this year. Any questions on that? Okay. Here's a chart where you can kind of see that one spike in October. And then we were just a little under where we were last year for November. And this is where you can kind of see, well, where was it the most? And it was within side city usage that we see the largest increase. There was a little bit outside the city limits, but the higher percentage was in the inside city limits. Any questions on that? This is total revenues excluding the impact fee, I'm sorry, the impact fee transfers. Oops, sorry, went back one more. So again, it generally follows the same kind of trend line that you normally see with our water. And our expenditures and where we're at by division. Any questions? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
One other question
Yes.
before you leave. We're using SRF funds to fund the treatment plant, and I imagine we'll use them to fund the new sewage plant, treatment plant.
We would have to apply for that.
Right.
Yes.
And we'll probably have to borrow them if we do the Charlotte Park sewer to septic to sewer conversion. Is there a limit on how much any one city can borrow from the SRF?
I don't know if they have a limit. They do have debt coverage ratios that we have to meet, so.
Different thing. I mean, I'm asking if we're gonna be able to borrow the money from the SRF.
I don't
Or-
know. I mean, until
have
we
to look
apply for it, I don't believe they have a specific limit.
You know,
The SRF, do you know?
I'll only offer this, so we assisted the city of Cape Coral in getting their SRF.
Can you go up to the?
Sorry.
Please identify yourself.
My apologies, Jason Chandra with CDM Smith. Our firm is currently part of the UE utility extension for the city of Cape Coral. We helped them get about $200 million worth of SRF funding this most recent round. There is a limit within the SRF, but I would think that the projects you guys have probably don't reach that limit.
Thank you.
And if they do reach the limit, there's other funding sources out there that are similar to SRF. There's some federal programs that are available as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Mike?
One question, on the capital outlay for the next fiscal year, it's 800,000.
Yes.
Is there a quick, easy summary of what projects is included in that amount?
In their capital outlay, yes. In the budget book, and I can send that out, they actually have a page that shows how they allocated that between their divisions. So whether it's vehicles or pumps and things like that, we'll have a page that shows that.
Yeah, I'd be
So I can
interested
take that right out of the book
in
because
seeing that. I don't need a big lengthy description or anything.
one
just a
page.
Line item would be great. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I appreciate, my son-in-law is a banker and been a banker for 30 years, and he said he took a graduate course in public accounting and it made his head hurt.
Makes no sense.
It's a
Yeah.
different animal.
Under unfinished business, in your packet was a status report on the reverse osmosis treatment plant. We are on schedule and on budget, and if you have not been by there, it is looking great. Stuff's out of the ground, the building is taking shape. It looks very, very impressive. And the amount of work that's been done the last couple of months is just tremendous. So I invite you, if you have time, swing by, contact me or contact Steve Leonard, and we'll be glad to show you around. Any questions on that?
When do you make coffee in the morning? Fresh?
I don't have coffee pot out there.
Oh,
But there's a
darn.
Keurig in the, contractor's trailer, and that's always fresh.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And with that, I'll turn this over very briefly to Steve and let him introduce the next topic.
Good morning, Steve Adams, Utilities Engineer. March of 2018, the cities asked our consultant, CDM Smith, to prepare a capacity analysis report of the wastewater treatment plant. So that report was completed in November 2018 and presented to this board. And that report identified some shortfalls or some deficiencies in our long-term needs at the wastewater plant. Based on that report, we've authorized CDM to prepare a report to identify alternatives for improving the wastewater treatment plant. The report has been completed, and we've asked them to come today and present the findings to you. I have with us today Jason Ciandra and Isaac Howell Hollowell from CDM Smith.
Good morning. For the record, Jason Chandra with CDM Smith. I'm the principal in charge for CDM Smith in Southwest Florida. And as Steve said, we're going to talk about the wastewater treatment plant improvements alternatives that we looked at over the past several months. So just kind of a brief overview of what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to start with kind of an overview of the facilities. I know some of the board members are new, maybe not familiar with the wastewater treatment plant, and let me give you guys a little bit of a background on it. Going to do a very quick summary of the evaluation we performed in 2018, kind of remind everyone kind of why we were asked to do this alternatives evaluation. Going to discuss the two different alternatives that were evaluated, and then talk about the selection of alternative, and we'll wrap everything up with kind of, where that puts us today and what the next steps look like. So the city owns and operates the City of Punta Gorda wastewater treatment plant that's out on Birdmont Road. I'll note this now, and I'll come back to the importance of it later, but the treatment plant is located on Fish and Wildlife property, and the city has a 50-year lease on that property that the facilities are on. The current treatment capacity for the plant, the rated capacity that is is 4 million gallons per day. That's on an average daily basis, so some days can be below it. Like right now, I think you guys are running around 2.5, and some days can be above that, but the permitted limit is 4 million gallons per day throughout the year. As an overview, kind of a background of the plant. The plant was originally constructed in 1984. It had an original capacity of 2 million gallons per day. That plant was expanded in 1988. And again, without expansion, but with basically a permit modification, the plant's rated capacity, what it can do on paper, was increased to 4 million gallons per day. Around the same time, there was a Headworks Improvements Project. That's the influence structure. The facility takes out all the large particles. There was also deep injection well constructed. And then the most recent construction project out there was the deep bed sand filters, which were constructed in 2014 as a result of some problems that the city was having with the deep injection well system. So an overview of the plant and how it operates. Flow comes into the plant at the headworks structure. It's combined there with return activated sludge. This is a biological treatment process. So we take some of that biology from the back end of the plant and returns to the front of the plant. It helps the treatment process work. From the headworks, everything flows by gravity through the aeration basins, which is where the real treatment takes place. From the aeration basins, it goes to clarifiers. The clarifiers separate out the treated water from the biological mass that's remaining. The biological mass is either sent back to the head of the plant or sent to be wasted. And then from there, the effluent flows by gravity to the filter pump station. Filter pump station pumps the water up to the top of these deep bed sand filters. The water trickles through there, basically taking out any kind of particulate matter that's still in there. And then from there, it goes to by gravity, it goes to a chlorine contact chamber that basically disinfects the water. And then that flows from there to the effluent pump station where it's sent down a deep injection well. So back in 2018, the city hired us to look at the existing treatment capacity for the plant. So as part of that, we looked at the updates on the flows and the loads to the plant, kind of what was coming into the plant and how that related. And so some of the findings of that evaluation were that the peaking factor. So we talked about the plant having a rated capacity of 4 million gallons a day. The peaking factor is when you get that high flow throughout the day, you get a kind of a low flows during certain times of the day, high flows during other times of the day. That high flow is about 3 times what the average flow into the plant is. And if we look at that peaking factor and take it out to that capacity of the plant at 4 million gallons a day, we get a new peak hour factor of about 12 million gallons a day, which basically drives the sizing of the tanks that are needed at the plant. The other thing we looked at was a biological oxygen demand. That's kind of a measurement of kind of how strong your waste is coming into the plant. And what we found is that the biological oxygen demand is significantly greater than what was designed around back in the early 1980s. And this is common. We're seeing this all across the Southwest Florida. We're dealing with this with the city of Fort Myers and Lee County. But part of the challenge is, when plants were originally constructed back in the 80s and the collection systems tended to be very loose. Let a lot of rainwater into the system. You got higher flows because of that. With new technology, you guys have gone in, you guys have fixed a lot of those problems. And as a result of that, you get less flow to the plant. But that flow that's coming in has a much higher concentration to it. And so that's what we're seeing now is that you guys have a plant that is receiving much more concentration than it did before. So as part of this evaluation, we developed that blue line that you'll see on the screen there. That blue line represents the projected flows to the wastewater plant over the next 20 years, well, over the next 18 years now. And what we plotted out there was kind of that trend line of where the flows are going to, and then what the rated capacity of the plant is currently. So you see, at 4 million gallons a day, the plant should be sufficient till about 2034. At which time, depending on what the flows really look like, you guys would be looking at some kind of expansion at that point. The negative thing that really came out of this report, though, is the actual capacity of that plant is really more like 2 million gallons a day. So the city operations staff is doing a great job keeping the plant up and running and working with what's there. The challenge is that as you start to get out towards more peak capacity of the 4 million gallons per day, as loadings increase, as more people come on the system, there's going to be more and more of a struggle to maintain the treatment requirements while still operating within that current plant. So some of the other operational challenges that the city faces, the way the plant was originally constructed, I don't think this was the intention, it's just the way it operates now. When we get flows that approach 4 million gallons per day, They have to shut off the aeration basins, and by doing that, you starve the biological process and it no longer works. But the reason why they do that is so that they prevent all that biological process from getting washed out of the plant. And if you lose that, you lose the plant and you start violating. Another challenge is that those filters, when they were put in there, were designed, as I said earlier, we have a new peak hour factor that 3 times the rated capacity. What that means is that when they did the filter construction project, it's about half the amount of filters that are really needed for the plant. So filters really need to be about 12 million gallons a day. You got about 6. So right now, if you get a flow over 6 million gallons a day coming into the plant, that's getting diverted to your on-site ponds. So it gets diverted during the high flow event and then brought back to the head of the plant. You're retreating that again as necessary. There's also challenges with that because whenever you send the water to the ponds, it's exposed to sunlight. You have the potential for algae growth, and once that algae starts growing, it's harder to get out of that process. There's nothing really within the process that's going to remove the algae from the system. Some other challenges, as I said, right now it's a 35, 36-year-old plant. One of the big challenges is biosolids. Biosolids are currently land applied on the property. It's about an 800-acre property. The majority of that is just hay fields that the biosolids are applied on. But once the rainy season hits, those biosolids have to be stored for a period of time, which presents its own challenges because they start to degrade and they change in the quality, which actually prevents them from being applied down the road if they were held too long. The chlorine contact facility, it's a requirement by the permit that before the water goes down the deep injection well, it has to be chlorinated for a period of time. At the peak capacity, and not necessarily today or not tomorrow or the next couple of years, but as you get towards that 4 million gallons a day, you start seeing flows that exceed 10 million gallons a day. You'll have to expand the capacity of the chlorine contact chambers because they're just not sufficient right now. The existing jet aeration system is antiquated. This has been looked at. This has been kind of a continual refrain that I think the city's been hearing for a number of years. That system just needs to be replaced. It doesn't work properly, and it's also difficult to maintain because it is so old and because the parts are no longer manufactured. There's deficiencies in the effluent pumping capacity. So you have this effluent pump station that sends the water down the deep injection well, and there's certain points within the operating spectrum that the pumps just aren't really working well because they're not designed for it. And the last part, and this is kind of an overarching comment about the whole plant, is that the existing equipment is basically at the end of its useful life cycle, most of the equipment. I mean, it's vintage 1984, 1988. Things like the electrical system basically are at the end of their useful life, and it's one of those things where you can't get the replacement parts anymore. So it makes the plant much more difficult to maintain and operate. So with that being said, I'm going to turn over to Isaac, who's going to talk about the alternatives we looked at for addressing these challenges.
The right button.
Yes.
For the record, Isaac Hollowell with CDM Smith. I'm going to walk you through each process for each alternative, identify what the capacity or deficiencies are, and what solutions that we were able to identify to bring the capacity of each process to 12 MGD. So, as part of the alternative evaluation, the main objectives were to We've already established the design flows and loads from the existing treatment capacity evaluation, but then we have to take that and then establish it for each alternative, because each alternative, how much flow is going to any existing infrastructure versus any new infrastructure, so that all had to be worked out. Clarifier evaluations, like you see on the right-hand side, it's a state point analysis to see where are these clarifiers overloaded with solids, at what flows are they overloaded with solids, as Jason was referring to. Biowind modeling. Biowind modeling is a whole plant model of the biological treatment. So it's able to say, with your inputs of what flows and what loads are coming into your plant, it will predict what nitrogen is coming out of your plant, what BOD is coming out of your plant, stuff like that. We did an evaluation of the aeration system technologies. Again, going back to the jet aeration system, what is the most appropriate aeration equipment as the existing equipment is antiquated and difficult to maintain. We evaluated the capital and operating costs. This is more for the selection of an alternative to compare the two of them, maybe apples to apples. Hydraulic evaluation, we did that for every process for both alternatives, and construction phasing. So evaluation of alternative number one. Alternative number one would be to keep your existing infrastructure. So your existing preliminary treatment process, aeration process, clarifier process, and construct a parallel secondary treatment system to bring everything up to the 4 mgd annual average daily flow or 12 mgd peak hour flow. So with the pretreatment process, currently that has a capacity of 12 mgd. So that does have the peak hour flow capacity that you need to treat to 12 mgd. However, with the return activated sludge sent back to the headwork structure, to the head of the plant, the capacity now with an influent flow of 12 mgd and your RAS of about 3 mgd, now you've exceeded your headworks capacity. So that's your deficiency. With the RAS going back to the headworks at a peak hour flow, you don't have the capacity at the headworks. So we proposed a solution to connect the RAS piping downstream of the headworks into a new flow splitting structure. That new flow splitting structure would now receive all of the flow coming out of the headworks, and then be able to divert 2 mgd to your existing secondary treatment facility and 2 mgd to your proposed secondary treatment facility that's run in parallel or operated in parallel with the existing. The secondary treatment, we just said, Jason was just saying, the existing plant has a 2 mgd annual average daily flow capacity with their secondary treatment. So you would need an additional 2 mgd if you were to reuse the existing secondary treatment capacity. So we proposed as a solution on the left-hand side, so you'll see everything in the darker line weight that is a solid line weight is what we are proposing as the new infrastructure. Everything that's in the lighter gray is what's existing. So we proposed a new secondary treatment facility on the western side of the existing secondary treatment facility with 2 MLE trains. The MLE process is, right now there is no nutrient limits on your effluent, so the MLE train will actually be able to treat that in case in the future you do get those into your permit. If they have to come and say, no, for deep well injection, you have to, or for reclaim water, if you were to treat for reclaim water standards, you would have to remove nitrogen and phosphorus, and the MLE would be able to give you that ability now while still meeting the needs of what you have today, of your permit regulatory limits today. The other side of it is all the jet aeration technology we replaced with fine bubble diffused aeration system for the secondary treatment system. And that's the same for alternative 1 and alternative number 2. So the tertiary treatment process evaluation, as Jason alluded to, there's currently 6 mgd of filtration capacity. With a 12 mgd peak hour flow, you currently have half the capacity that is needed. So as a solution, we proposed a new, almost identical to the deep bed sand filters that you're showing now, 6 mgd deep bed or sand filters with a new filter feed pump station. So that would bring your capacity now for your high level disinfection, what it's called, to 12 mgd capacity. The effluent pumping system, right now, your injection well has a capacity of 12 mgd. Great, you guys have no deficiencies there for your peak hour. But the current effluent pumps have a firm capacity now. Keep in mind that regulatory agencies consider your capacity of your pump station is the capacity with your largest pump out of service. And so right now you have 2 primary pumps, and each rated about 4 million gallons per day, and then 1 jockey pump that is rated about 2 million gallons per day. So with firm capacity, that jockey pump and the primary pump would be your firm capacity, and you are about 4 mgd total capacity with your effluent pump station. So in order to bring it up to 12 mgd, you would need to either increase or add additional pumps. However, that becomes difficult with the current access roads that are going around there to be able to expand that pump station. So we looked at a solution that would involve a future phase 2 chlorine contact tank and effluent pump station. The phase 2 part is all about the current booster pump station that feeds your plant. All the influent to your plant has about 9 mgd capacity. So if you can't even get 12 mgd to your plant, then until you can get 12 mgd to your plant, then I guess all of your processes don't really need to be able to treat 12 mgd. So that's why we broke it off and say, okay, when your capacity at your upstream pump stations can get 12 mgd, at that point you will need to construct your future chlorine contact tank that has about 10 mgd capacity, and a future effluent pump station that will have 6 MGD capacity. So in the phase one, you'll have a total plant capacity of about 10 MGD for both alternative 1 and alternative number 2. So the solution for phase one is to install 2 pumps, 2 primary effluent pumps at your existing effluent pump station. And when you build your phase 2, you will build another 6 MGD pump station, 6 MGD core and contact tank, and at that point, the entire plant will be expanded to 12 MGD. This is just a graph of your hydraulic profile through the plant. So it's really, you're establishing all of your water surface elevations, making sure you're not overflowing any structures, you're not submerging any weirs that are gonna impact your actual treatment process. So for alternative number 1, as you see here, everything in the darker, or the blue back there, that's your water surface elevation. And the other, I guess, brownish color is your structure height. And what we're showing is that in this instance, there is no overflowing. And I don't know if you guys recall, but at the existing treatment capacity evaluation we presented last year, there were flows above 6 MGD, there were overflows in your plant. And then for the solids handling process, what we had identified as a deficiency was really just your aeration technology, as the generation is antiquated. The solution is to replace the blowers and the jet aeration system with coarse bubble diffused aeration system. And that will improve your treatment process. The capacity of your existing solids handling process is adequate. So there's no necessary improvements there. They are putting in a belt filter press that's going to actually improve the process and decrease the need for storage. So that's also happening kind of in parallel with these evaluations. But there's nothing outside of the coarse bubble diffused aeration system needed at this time. So then there's alternative number 2. Alternative number 2 is very similar. The main difference is, I guess it's very similar at the head of your plant and at your effluent side, the downstream side of the plant. The stuff in the middle is what's different. So this scenario, because of the age and condition of your existing secondary treatment system, we would have proposed that you abandon that, operate it while the new infrastructure is being constructed, and completely abandon it afterwards. So that means that this alternative would have a new 4 MGD secondary treatment facility. And like I said, the effluent, the HLD, and the preliminary headworks are very similar to alternative number 1. So right here, you're seeing on the same side, it's the west-hand side of your existing secondary treatment, 3 new MLE trains and 3 new clarifiers. With the new electrical building. It's really not much of a different of a footprint. The clarifiers are a little bit larger because we don't have the capacity of your existing clarifiers to use. But all in all, the land is available to construct this right next to your existing plant to make it all work. Same thing, tertiary was exactly the same as alternative number 1, 6 MGD deep bed sand filters. Effluent disposal, same as alternative number 1. There's no difference. So really the difference between alternative number 1 and alternative number 2 is how much capacity are you getting from your new secondary treatment facility. Hydraulic profile again. This one here is slightly better, and it's only better by inches, but inches can mean a whole lot whenever you're talking about high flows coming into your plant and being able to react to those high flows. And so the one thing about the hydraulics in alternative number 2, actually there's 2 things, is the headworks brings you back down to where it was designed at, your water surface elevation. Whereas in alternative number 1, we were a few inches higher than that. And I know the operators will like to have that available freeboard to give them more time to react if a high flow is coming into your plant. And again, same thing with alternative number 2, the solids handling process. There's adequate capacity. There's nothing that needs to be done today. The one thing that I will note is that alternative number 2 does give you the ability to reuse your existing secondary treatment tanks, your aeration basins, and your clarifiers as sludge storage systems. So that it's not that you need to build that, but the belt filter press is going to give you that extra capacity that's needed. But if in the future you do need additional capacity, you have 8 tanks right there that could be converted to sludge storage systems. And the idea was, before the Bell Filter Press, was that it would give you the ability to not have to have an emergency contract with Synagro for emergency dewatering and hauling. But again, it's not needed, you have capacity, and the belt filter press will eliminate that additional storage needs when you can't land apply during the wet season. So, I think we're going back to Jason here, but in the end here, the
Can I
real.
stop you, Isaac,
Oh, yes,
before you
please,
get
go ahead.
too far? I got caught a couple of times on this, and I missed it as I was reading through here. I kept reading when I was reviewing the material that was sent out, the reports, that you really like fine bubbles, fine bubbles, fine bubbles. Takes less handling, less energy for the pumps, smaller blowers, and so forth. I think the question in my mind focuses on whether we're looking way down the treatment at the solids and not wanting to disrupt the solids, mats, and so forth. That's why you want to go to coarse bubbles instead of fine bubbles, or why, or what have I missed?
For solids, coarse bubble would be recommended just because it's, you got all those solids sitting on top of those diffusers and you could be clogging them up. Where fine bubbles is you're keeping it all suspended. The coarse bubble is just historically, you can use fine bubble diffuse aeration for solids handling. It's just probably not the standard practice to do that.
And why isn't it the standard practice?
Just because you have a lot more concentration of solids sitting on top of diffusers that could clog those diffusers.
That didn't help me much.
Well,
The concept I'm okay
So-
with,
so
but
the-
I'm trying to think physically how maybe that's where I'm hung up. Let's not waste a lot of time on it.
Well, you have better oxygen transfer with the fine bubble.
that's
And
right.
Here, we don't need it because we're past that treatment already, right? This is
Correct.
now,
This is
heavy
solids.
materials handling is,
Correct.
okay, all right, I'm fine.
Correct. The aeration basins, the actual biological treatment process will have fine bubble diffuse aeration, and that's exactly why you get better oxygen transfer efficiency. With respect to the solids, it's just industry, and I'm a hydraulics engineer. I do know why they want to use coarse bubble here, but it's really just to minimize potential for clogging.
Okay.
Could you refresh our memory on what size the retention ponds are?
The retention ponds,
How many days storage do we have?
6 days.
The side stream to storage ponds, about 60 million gallons,
Yeah.
give or take. About 60 million gallons, so if you were to say 6 was coming in, you get about 10 days storage.
On the face of it, it's a fairly simple question, I think, but it gets to some level of detail when you have to make some decisions on what the solutions you're recommending are. I mean, your professional advice, we appreciate that, and that's based on your education and your experience and everything. But how do you find and recommend the best solution, given all the other universe of alternatives out there?
yeah.
I mean, in each case, we've got a solution, but there could be another solution presumably too. How do we know you're taking in consideration cost and what works and all of that?
It's a fair question. So we, in our contract, I mean, the contract initially, we work with the city to develop what we're going to be doing throughout this. And so as part of the existing treatment capacity evaluation, we were able to identify, any deficiencies that were there. So we knew what they were gonna be. And then from there, we have to just think about, okay, what makes the most sense with respect to what they have versus where they need to be. And I think that, yes, there are other alternatives out there, but we as a firm and as an industry, we know what works, I guess, and so we try to stay with what we have proven before. If you wanted to go a different route with something that's maybe a newer technology, we'd probably recommend pilot studies to make sure you're proving it. Like with the filters, you're going to want to go in there. The reason we say deep bed sand filters is a pilot test was done and recommended deep bed sand filters based on the suspended solids that were going to these filters. And so for us to go back and change it for a cloth media filter, which may be cheaper, would be maybe going against what another engineer had already said in the report. So we would probably say, if we were to do that, let's do a pilot study to make sure that we're getting the appropriate technologies for this.
And maybe to further answer your question, so as part of our process for determining what alternatives we'd look at, so we looked at two alternatives in significant detail. And we often say we could do more, but it comes down to dollars and cents, you know. So some of the other technologies that are out there for wastewater treatment, there's MBR, which is membrane bioreactors. Those are very high energy intense, but the benefit of them is they can fit on a very, very tight footprint. One of the benefits you guys have at your plant site is you don't have a tight, limited footprint. And so going to a membrane bioreactor, while it's the best, newest thing out there, I mean, they've been proven, we've done them in Southwest Florida, and they've been demonstrated for a number of years that they're successful. The cost to construct and operate wouldn't make a lot of sense in this situation, given the amount of space you guys have to run the process. There's other things like moving bed bioreactors. Biomag, which is basically a similar process. That's the idea, is that there's a lot of like floating media that will float through your plant and allow the biomass to grow on the media. But those also have their challenges, because then you got to get the biomass off the media and run the media back through the plant. And those are also, you know, they're really focused on footprint. So a lot of the new technologies that are coming out today, we're looking at for facilities that are in drastically expanding areas. Good example is like Lee County Utilities is looking at different technologies. We looked at them with them, and they kind of went back and said, no, we want the old technology. But a lot of it comes down to, we have an existing footprint, the plant's built out on the site, but we still have new developments coming in. And so the technology allows you to basically double your capacity in a small footprint. You could do that here. I mean, you could take some of those newer technologies and drop them into your existing tankage and get a benefit from them. But I think the reality is, for the cost benefit here, you're better off looking at other proven technologies. Like MLE is what it's called a modified Lutzik-Edinger. And the idea behind that process is you're doing different types of aeration to it, aerate and oxic zone, that basically allow the biology to work in there. It's very well proven, very simple to operate. It's one of those things, it's a forgiving process. So, you know, we looked at that and we discussed all those opportunities with the city before we went in and evaluated the two alternatives that we did.
Correct. And as I said, that actually does nitrogen removal. And so if in fact the city goes to reclaim water, they'll have that in place already, because and it doesn't change the biological treatment. You're still gonna get the same effluent BOD limits, but it does give you the ability to remove nitrogen and phosphorus.
A lot of different solutions that we're looking at, a lot of different Band-Aids. I'm just wondering, and you may be uncomfortable with this, I'm sorry, but I just would wonder, if we had another engineering firm, for example, would the recommendations likely be the same? Would they be 80% the same, 50% the same, or?
Yeah.
I think if you hired any other national level engineering firm that did not have a specific agenda they were pushing, I think you'd find very similar recommendations. I think the idea behind an MLE process, and, you know, so we'll get to our recommended alternative, which based on cost really comes down to the better alternative is to build this new plant next to your existing plant. But a lot of what drives those recommendations is just the technology is the technology. I mean, if we were all going after a plant job somewhere, we're all gonna come at it with probably the same process, because we're all looking at, okay, this is your influent water quality, this is your effluent water quality, this is how big the site is. And we all know, based on that information, what to put on that plant site. The only thing that might drive that is, you know, good example is Collier County. So we do a lot of work in Collier County. They're gonna build a brand new greenfield wastewater treatment plant. It's on 200 acres. They could do pretty much whatever they wanted to there. They wanna go with a membrane bioreactor, the highest end, newest technology, most energy intensive. It makes absolutely no sense to me, but that's what they wanna do. So that's an owner preference thing. But it's one of those things that when you look at the owner's preference and the needs, you know, that's what's really driving this recommendation.
How would you recognize if a particular engineering firm was looking at had a particular bias or a particular agenda that they were looking to promote, as opposed to any other that was looking for only the best solution?
And the plant he's talking about is a greenfield plant, where this is an existing plant where we have to fit a new secondary treatment plant in between two existing processes, right? And so hydraulically, that's one of the big things that comes out of that, is how do you get water to be able to flow through this and be able to go, you know, split to this way, split to this way. Where a greenfield plant, you really start at your downstream end and you just work your way back up, and it's a lot easier, right? And so when you're looking at these alternatives and you're evaluating these alternatives, you have to make sure that it works biologically, but two, it has to work hydraulically. And as you'll see in alternative number one, I personally spent a lot of time making it even work with respect to hydraulics, where it's pretty easy. I mean, you can add tankage and make it work biologically, right? But can you add tankage and still make that flow? And that's where the challenge becomes.
Thank you.
Yes.
We'll be expanding the number of ERUs served, by 10 or 20%, simply due to the septic to sewer conversions that we have planned. We looked at gravity sewers, and economically, they simply can't be done. Which leaves us with after we fixed, or I fixed, the report by an engineer with an agenda, step one. Now, one of the things I found in my readings is that it changes the stuff chemically, I don't know about sludge, that goes into the waste treatment plant. And who knows what kind of effluent systems might be developed over the next several years. We don't know. Will this plant have the flexibility to handle the different chemistry and physics of, let's say, a different effluent to solids composition at the headworks?
So it's a good question. I mean, I think, so you talked about not doing gravity sewers, so I think that means you're talking about doing more like a vacuum sewer system or?
Vacuum or step.
Okay. So I would say yes. So the problem that the plant faces today, the problem a lot of plants face today, is when they were originally constructed, there were assumptions based on industry numbers at that time of what biological influent looked like. I mean, you were getting 200 BOD was kind of like a peak condition. And now we're seeing in a lot of areas, especially with the tighter collection systems, that 300 is a pretty normal number. So we would basically, based on our latest industry understanding and kind of, the standards we use as a firm, we would pick those numbers to be part of that biological process. And if that was a piece of information, hey, we think this is gonna be all XYZ, for example, if you guys started a program where you were gonna start receiving septage at your plant, that would be something you could do. You get all your septic haulers in the area, you could say, we're gonna have a septage receiving station, and now you're getting a different kind of waste coming into the plant. That would be looked at in the biological process. That biowind modeling can be used to look at that process and look at, okay, now we got this different water quality coming in, what does that look like, and how does that impact our biological treatment?
Is the plant designed to have that flexibility?
Yeah, so right now, between the existing plant and the modified Lutzik Edinger process that we're talking about, those are very common processes for plants. Biological processes are very flexible in terms of what they can handle. They have a lot of flexibility. It's one of the nice things, it's one of the reasons why operators like them so much, is because you have a lot of wiggle room, and you have a lot of levers to pull. When you start running into problems, you're like, well, I can do this, I can take our biomass, and I can increase the quantity of biomass that we have, so I can treat more, I can decrease it if I'm running into a different problem. So you got a lot of flexibility in there. That's one of the benefits of a biological process. When you start to get into some of the other ones that treat a lot better, a lot higher, for example, the membrane bioreactors, they do an awesome job. They treat to such a high standard of treatment, but when you're deep well injecting that at the end of the day, and you're not sending it out to reclaimed, or you're not considering, let's do indirect potable reuse, which is where you take that treated wastewater and we either inject it in the ground or we send it to a water treatment plant to make it drinking water. When you're not doing that, and you're sending it down into the ground to be basically stored for millions of years until that water cycle brings it back up again, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to go to certain high levels of treatment. But to answer your original question, the flexibility will be in the plant to address changes you guys are looking at.
Thank you.
Right, and I guess the takeaway is that if we know what those loadings are gonna be, that's just aeration sizing. Your tanks are all sized based on the flow and whatever detention time you wanna have in there, or residence time. But it's really, as the BOD increases, the amount of air you need to put into the system increases.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions, or? We'll continue on,
Please.
we'll wrap up the presentation. All right, Jason Chandra, again for the record. So when we came to evaluating the alternatives, we looked at it from definitely a cost perspective. We knew that was gonna be very important to the city, to you as the advisory board and then the city council. And then we also looked at non-cost factors. So as a starting point, we looked at life cycle costs, and not just the capital costs and not just O&M costs, but life cycle costs. So shown here are the annual cost evaluation between the two options. We limited our cost differential really just to that middle part, the secondary treatment process, that's where all the air is put in the system. That's actually gonna be your biggest sink for cost. And so the average cost differential between the two options was about $32,000 in favor of alternative number two. Basically, with the new system and the new geometry of those tanks, it's gonna be much more efficient than the existing system is, even when we retrofit that with better diffuser equipment. That is not good at all. That's our cost numbers.
No cost.
Steve, do you have the report? I can put it on here if that.
I can also just pull it up off the internal drive, it probably won't do that. If that's helpful, did you need to find it in here?
Do you have the final version?
No. I do have it on the J drive.
Okay, why don't you pull it up on there?
Okay. Let me see if I can,
It could be, yeah.
it's not surprising. Well, not looking too good,
Let me try
as
this.
usual.
If it's a font issue, I can always change the font in the slide and put it back up.
And, I don't even know if I can interrupt that.
That's the only other I've seen do that, if it works on one computer.
I'm gonna step away from the
Where are we trying to
computer.
get it on?
Let me try this,
Is it on the Z drive?
Oh, it's on our J drive.
On the Z drive?
We can get to the J drive. Yeah, they are.
Yeah.
You gonna change the font.
You got it.
Font change.
All right. So what we did here is we took this is a very high level evaluation of the cost. We have a more detailed breakdown of that looks at contingencies and assumptions that's in the report that you guys were provided. But really what this shows the cost differential between alternative one, which is keeping the existing trains and building a new secondary train next to them, and then constructing a whole new secondary treatment process. And what we see is about $1 million cost difference between the two of them, so a little bit, right around 2.5% cost difference between the alternatives. So we took that information, and what we want to do is we wanted to look at kind of like an overall scoring of it, kind of do a weighted criteria evaluation. We looked at capital cost. Obviously, as I said, there's about $1 million difference in there. We looked at the 20-year cost of operation and compared those two. We looked at operational complexity. So one of the biggest challenges, and our operators could attest to this, one of the biggest challenges as an operator is keeping that plant functioning. When it goes out of, when it stops functioning the way you want it to bring it back into compliance can be a challenge sometimes. One of the biggest disadvantages of keeping the existing train in process and building a new train next to it is now you have two different treatment trains, and they're gonna operate differently. One's gonna be a modified Lutz-Gettinger and kind of a straight path. It's gonna serpentine flow through there, and the other one's gonna be a similar process, but it's gonna happen in a circular tank. And what that can mean is it can mean different type of biology in each of the tanks, different type of organisms growing, and then when we bring it back together, how those interact and the type of microorganisms, the microbiology that gets into the system could become challenging, could favor one train over the other train, making it problematic and more difficult to operate. We also looked at operational reliability. The idea of using 35-year-old tanks and repurposing them is not unheard of. We did a structural evaluation early on that found that the tanks are actually in really good shape for as old as they are. But there's challenges with them. The type of tanks they are, you can't modify them. They're all pre-stressed concrete, which means you can't drill a hole in it. So you can't just create it and operate and put pipes in the way you want to, so you have to kind of work within the system to make it work. So operational reliability, we think that because the system is old, it does have old equipment in it, it's gonna be less reliable than a new secondary treatment process if that was put in place. As I talked about the hydraulics, the big thing is, having enough capacity and enough freeboard so that when you do get a high weather event, or you do have a problem in the plant where you get a backup, you have time to react to that. You guys might be more familiar with this on the collection system side, so if you have a lift station, you get a high level alarm, how much space you have between that high level alarm and the top of that manhole before it starts spilling out in the streets is important, because it tells you how much time you have to get out there and fix the problem. Same thing at the plants, and you have similar compliance issues, that if you start to have hydraulic problems, you start to overflow, you're gonna get an FDEP's radar, and you're gonna get a consent order for it. The other factor that we looked at was constructability. Neither one of these projects are gonna be, I guess, easy to construct. You're working on an existing plant, you're gonna have to do maintenance of plant operations, you're gonna have to figure out how to do your cut-ins and your tie-ins when those times come. The benefit of alternative 2 over alternative 1 is obviously you can keep the existing plant running as it runs today and build next to it, and then do your tie-ins at the very end of the project. Alternative 1, it means that basically you're gonna have to manipulate and go back and forth between the existing train and the new train. You're gonna have a lot more tie-ins, a lot more challenges making that happen. Additionally, you're building structures right next to the existing tankage, which means that you're gonna do excavation next to them. You might find old pipes that you didn't know were there. A lot of challenges working, in such close proximity to existing operation. But overall, we looked at all that. We took a weighting factor to it, and that's described really well in the report. But overall, the score for alternative 2 was a 4.76 versus a 3.72 for alternative 1. I will say this, we talked a little bit earlier about, if an engineer has bias, one of the things we tried very hard to do, and Isaac can attest to this, he spent a lot of time struggling with this, is when we did this originally, when the scores came out, we're like, it feels very much like we just want alternative 2 to be the answer. And so we went back in and we looked at, the factors that we had in there. We looked at the weighting of them, really to try and give a very fair presentation to you guys, not to just say, well, we really want it to be alternative 2. We really wanted to give a fair shake to both alternatives, because it's ratepayer money, it's the city's, investment, and we want to make sure that we're making the best recommendation we can, and not just something that, if you didn't like our answer, you could go to another engineering firm, and we would hope that they would like, yeah, CDM did a really good job with this, they did a good evaluation, a very fair evaluation. So conclusions and next steps. I alluded to this earlier, but our recommended alternative is to go with a new secondary treatment process here. We know there's a slightly higher capital cost, about 2.5% higher capital cost, but we believe that with a lot of the complexities that are gonna happen during that construction, there's a good chance that these two plants are probably the same cost when it comes down to it. There's a margin of error within these estimates right now, or a contingency that we have in there. It's probably about 25-30%, and it's within that contingency that these two costs kind of come in together. But separate from that, it's gonna be a more reliable plant. It's gonna be a plant that, as you have an aging workforce and less people available within the wastewater industry, you'll be able to train people on this plant much faster than if you had 2 different treatment trains that you're trying to train people up on. So train 1, we operate in this way, train 2, we operate in this way. It simplifies your training process and it makes the operations easier. It's gonna have better constructability. Like I said, we'll be able to construct the new facility separately, completely separate from the existing facility, and do your tie-ins towards the end of the project. It's gonna have better ease of maintenance and operations, better hydraulics, meaning that less likely to overflow the plant under a wet weather event. Better O&M costs, as we said, it's about $32,000 a year difference. And again, it's a nominal cost differential on the capital side. This is an overview of the cash flow. This is for alternative 2. As you can see, the majority of that money is being spent during the construction. You guys are doing the water plant project now, I'm sure you've seen that. But basically, we see this as about a 24-month construction, and that's where that cost is really coming in there. And so steps going forward, the first step would be basically a preliminary engineering report. We'd start that design process. We'd also work with the city to start that lease negotiation with the Fish and Wildlife Commission. The lease doesn't expire until 2025, but as was identified by staff, we really need to get their buy-in that we can make modifications to the plant, as well as we can get a new lease that will allow the city to maintain that property. Obviously, you're not gonna build a $38 million facility not knowing that you own the land in perpetuity. Second step would be the final design phase. We think that's gonna take between 12 and 18 months, depending on permitting, if there's any additional lease concerns, things like that, we'd step into a bidding phase. Now, the city is looking at doing another CMAR project for this, similar to what was done with the water plant.
Seymour?
Construction manager at rest, my apologies. So if the CMAR process was identified, we'd probably bring the CMAR on board closer to the beginning to middle of the final design phase, with the idea that the CMAR provides value by being part of the design review team. They do value engineering as part of the project. They look for constructability challenges, and they help identify things that drive down the cost for the project. 2 months of bidding, a lot of that bidding would be, the CMAR would take the design and they break it up into packages. So it might be an electrical package, a concrete package, and they go and they get bidding from local vendors or statewide vendors. They would actually come in and do the work. And then construction, we're looking at about a 24-month construction period. One of the things I mentioned early on, and I want to come back to again, is, under each alternative, the existing electrical infrastructure for the plant needs to be replaced. And that is a significant undertaking. So I think a good chunk of the time of construction would be part of, the electrical would be a lot of that, as well as all the new tankage that's gonna need to go in under either alternative. And with that, we'd like to entertain any questions you have. Yes, sir.
I'm a rates guy, finance guy. And I checked out the rate impact of this. It's about 25% increase in our sewage rates. People are not gonna be happy. Are there ways that, and engineers, I've worked with engineers my whole career. Engineer looks at the cheapest present value revenue requirements. That's what he's going to do. And also tends to want to just, build the thing, get it done, because that makes it cheapest. But from the perspective of the ratepayer, that can be quite a whack. Is there a way to phase this somehow, so it's built more slowly and we can get those rate increases? We hate it when people come with axes and
Torches,
torches to our homes.
pitchforks. Did you
Yeah,
say
pitchforks, yeah, good point. Is there an option there that?
That is a great question, and the reason why I say it's a great question is it's something the staff asked us day one. When we won this job back in January of 2018, we were negotiating our scope, and that was part of our discussions. We want, the city's like, we want to look at a stepwise way of doing this. The biggest challenge you face right now is your existing plant has basically a capacity, depending on how you operate it, really it's about a 2 million gallon a day plant. And that has to do with, we don't know, we don't have the original engineering calculations as to how they came up with it being a 4 or how they justify it to the state. But at 2 million gallons a day capacity, you guys don't meet requirements today in terms of you guys are getting, you can get peak flows for, 3 months of the year that will be over 3. So that plant is basically over capacity. The staff's doing a great job keeping it operating. So the challenge is, can you increase the capacity from 2 to 3 or 4 for a lesser dollar amount? And I think the short answer is probably not. It's a reliability thing. It has to do with the way those trains come online. Now, if you wanted to segment down those treatment trains and make them smaller, you're probably adding more construction cost per train, but there might be a way to kind of finagle that in there, but I don't think it's cutting costs dramatically. The other thing is, when you look at it, you're 14 years away from being at capacity for the plant. So this plant gets built, and then within 10 years, you're looking at, okay, depending on, and really, it's an inflow driver. If wastewater flows decrease or loads kind of stay constant and technology increases, so you get less flow to the plant, you might never need to expand the plant. Or if you don't increase your service area, that could be the same as well. But your question really was about, can we phase this? And I think the challenge is, you have two big problems right now with the plant. The first is,
Filters.
but treatment-wise.
Oh, yeah.
You have a treatment process issue, and then you have your filters issue. So you can't really deal with the flows that are coming in today in a, what I would say, sustainable manner. That the staff is able to divert flows off to ponds and bring them back to the head of the plant to treat them after the fact is not a sustainable approach, and will lead to problems down the road at some point where mistakes are made, or algae grows and you can't get the algae out of your water, so you can't meet your treatment requirements at the end of the plant, and then you start getting violations. So I think, I can appreciate the concern for the rate increase. I think the challenge is, I don't know how you would break this project up into smaller packages to spread that cost over a longer period of time.
Unfortunately, the largest deficiencies are the most expensive at this.
Yes.
Being new to the board, new to the entire infrastructure of Punta Gorda, I'm gonna throw a silly question out there, but I understand that we pump and pump and pump and pump again. Had anybody given consideration to taking one section of the system and using this money to build another plant closer to one of our holding facilities and eliminate putting everything out to Vermont Road?
That was not a consideration of staff, that wasn't raised. There was a discussion early on. There was ongoing conversations with Charlotte County about the potential to co-locate a facility. And my understanding is within a matter of a couple of months of us starting our project, our current scope actually included an activity to help the city have those discussions. And Charlotte County kind of backed out of it. They had an engineer who came in and said, no, you're much better replacing your existing plant, which is over on Burnt Store Road, just north of Cape Coral. You're better off replacing that than pumping all the water to Punta Gorda. So that conversation fell through. But there was never a, let's look at a decentralized system or a system to put all the flows somewhere else.
And depending on where that's located, I mean, your collection system, your pipes in the road are very, very expensive as well, and that could be an expensive endeavor to reroute where the flow is going to.
Understood.
I have a question for Tom. Tom, we know, mentioned earlier, Social Security and all of that. We know this is all gonna happen PT, post-Tom. And we appreciate, your enormous expertise and years of experience you bring to all this. And I'm just wondering, what might we need to be worried about over time? I understand this sort of thing happens, a change in leadership, but you're gonna go and this process goes on. The city manager is also gonna be gone October 1st. Communication between the utilities department and this board and city council runs through you two guys. What possible complications might there be that you can see, if you've thought about it at all, between this,
I'm hoping there's none, obviously.
Obviously.
And again, let me just say, on this side of it, I am the weakest link in the utilities department. These guys and gals here are the utilities department. They tell me what to do, what to say, and they get it right a lot of the time. So you have no concerns there. The quality will continue, the leadership will continue, and the dedication will continue. I know that the city manager, and in my interview, in my evaluation in September, Howard asked me what my plans were, and I said that I will be leaving when the RO plant comes online, which is in June. And he said, then we will start in February seriously discussing your replacement. So that will come to you in a month or two. Howard wants to put all of his energy into that. There are 2 or 3 directors that'll be leaving this summer. I'm the first one. We think there'll be a couple of others. So his focus, and he'll be here for another year, his focus is going to be to staff those departments back up and get them to the same level they are before he leaves. So I hope it will be, the continuity will be there. I certainly know in our department, the quality will be there, because I'm not taking that away. That quality was here when I got here and will continue after I'm gone. I hope that helps. I mean, I know it's Howard's highest priority.
I'm a little bit nervous, but,
He's going to present it to the city council probably first meeting in February, that we need to start looking, not only utilities, but we've been doing succession planning for a long, long time. So, that's one of his priorities. And my replacement could be sitting in this room,
I understand.
so.
Not Bill.
Could be Bill.
I'm ready to volunteer some information. I've heard your questions and comments. I just want to add some thoughts. I have a very high confidence level in the material that has been presented to you today.
Yes.
I think CDM is exactly on target and making a very high quality recommendation for the future of our city wastewater treatment plant. One question was asked, could we decentralize? That was considered. We're actually only changing what's absolutely necessary in this recommendation, and that's the biological treatment capacity, how much water can we treat, and the hydraulic capacity, how much water can go through that facility. There's a regulatory criteria that says we need to meet a 4 MGD plant, and we need to meet a 12 MGD hydraulic rate. It's a requirement based on the size of our surface area and our population and standard planning standards, and that's what we need to meet. We did a capacity analysis report. We spent 2 years on this project. We started in 18, we worked through 18 and all of 19 to get here today. So I think we've looked at these things very carefully to try to identify the minimum amount of work that's going to be needed to have our facility succeed and meet standards. See, the issue is we have to meet biological numbers every single month. And if we don't meet those numbers, there's going to be consequences. The treatment staff does a fantastic job shuttling things around to make sure those numbers are happening today. We're very concerned it's going to be more and more difficult to do that in a 2-year cycle that would take to actually build all this. So we would be nervous if we didn't have a plan of action to try to improve the capacity of this facility. So I think they've looked at that very carefully and said a new MLE process will work very successfully at this facility. And I think they're correct in that recommendation. We can certainly study it with more alternatives. But we think that this is a very well-prepared report. We took our time, we identified all the alternatives we could think of, we sifted those through, and we've pretty much identified what we think is the minimum scenario moving forward. So I don't know, I hope that is somewhat helpful. But you have an independent expert here present today, and if you wanted to ask him, he could perhaps offer his opinion, because it's highly likely that Bill's read this report, and Bill was the main engineer player when we designed our facility way back in 1984, so he knows everything about our existing facility, and he probably knows pretty much everything that was described in here, and you could ask him if he has an opinion on the direction of.
Steve, thank you very much. I appreciate that. For my part, I read through the second report. I figured it was the most critical for me to be familiar with. I really appreciate the presentation. Spot on. You guys are very good, CDM.
Yes.
And it all makes sense. It's a very detailed report, particularly for a report with this much substance. And the size numbers we're talking about for this community. I think it's got a lot of stuff in there. 25% is a big rate spike. It's shock. There's a whole literature, though, on rate settings. About a third of that literature covers exactly these sorts of things, which can be done with economic fairness, political cover, and there's a lot of things that can be done on this that is not proper, I don't think, for this. It'd be good for a work session sometime, but not for the rest of the day. I'm trying to move this along because I intend to leave in about 6 minutes. I've got a previous appointment, but we don't have to. Mike is here, and he can take over. Are there some other comments about this before we get on to staff comments, which we've kind of segued into, which is fine?
I just want to say, and I'm looking at Kristen and Steve, if memory serves, we have budgeted in our CIP monies to get through final design. So As CDM pointed out, the next step is to do a preliminary design report looking at alternative two, if y'all agree with what their report says, and do a preliminary design report, which will ratchet down the timetable and ratchet down the costs even further so that we, this is the 20,000-foot view, and we'll get down lower with a closer view. And I think that's kind of what this is going to city council, the second meeting in January, but that's where we are in terms of budgeting. We have budgeted already, I believe we have enough money to get to the final design.
So you're seeking a recommendation from this board today relative to the two
For
alternatives?
city council, if possible, yes.
I would agree with everything you said. I've seen a lot of engineering reports in my career and my time on this board. This is the first good one I've seen here in Punta Gorda. The rest were garbage. You're being commended for doing a great job. And I don't compliment people very often. It's not my nature.
Never.
The other thing is, as the chairman said, you can work out the rate impacts. He talked about the extensive literature. I'm probably personally responsible for 20 or 25% of that literature. So yeah, we can,
Not all the literature's that good,
I know, some of it sucks, and that's the part that I wrote. But no, we can figure the rates out, but I think we need to let city council know they're probably looking at maybe 5% a year for 5 years, kind of like we did with the RO plant. Jim will remember that.
You remember that?
Was a lot of blood running in the streets, Jim? Thank you.
Tom, does, I know we have years and years, obviously, of experience with utilities matters on this board. Does anybody on city council have any utilities experience from work?
No.
No.
That makes that communication angle I was talking about,
Right.
exceedingly
Very,
important.
very important. Well, this presentation and any comments that you provide today is what city council will hear in January. So they'll start out with good communication.
How will they hear it?
As long as it says.
Same way.
alternative two.
It'll be an agenda item. They'll receive the same information you have, plus whatever recommendation or comments you have, and then CDM will present the exact same thing.
I'm going to make a motion.
Yes, sir.
I move that the UAB recommend to the city council that it accept alternative, do we call it?
Two.
Alternative two, to begin immediately.
Second.
There's a second. Is there any discussion, any further discussion on this by the board?
Just one
Yes,
quick
please.
comment, please. First of all, as an engineer, I really enjoyed the presentation as well. I thought the single most valuable page for me, and perhaps for the council as well, is this table 5.4, where you did the economic and non-economic evaluation. As a veteran of many construction projects, including the Big Dig in Boston, I know I have a pretty good idea where the overrun's gonna come from. Constructability over here is actually key and might be weighted higher, because it seems to me if there's any overruns, serious overruns to come, it'll come from constructability. And I really like that suggestion you had about being able to operate the plant as is while the new plant is being built. And you never know what you're gonna find until you break ground. So constructability is really key. So that, in combination with the other strength factors, I thought were key. But constructability, I think, would go a long way if it was weighted a little bit more, because I think that's where the overruns and unpleasant surprises are gonna come from. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Call for the vote. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, no. Unanimous. Thank you for the presentation. It's very thorough. The report is very well done.
Thank you very much.
Good job.
Are there any additional staff comments that need to be made at this time?
On this item, no, but I do have, and before you leave, And I want to introduce, some of you may remember, some of you may not remember, we have the wastewater treatment plant management staff here, Dave Brooks and Scott Rambo. And I'm very, very sad to report the third leg of the stool, the brilliant stool out there, Bill Burns, the chief operator, passed away the day after Christmas. Bill had a very short illness. He was with the city 42.5 years. Oh, my God. He was a member of Mensa, one of the brightest people you'd ever know and ever meet. And it was a shock to all of us. But Dave and Scott are here, and the project will be in good hands. So.
Thank you. We're sad to hear that.
Should we make a motion to inform us, cancellation, consider the step rate increases so they don't get?
I don't think so. The question has come up, should the committee, and I'll throw it out to the advisory board, should we make any kind of a recommendation at this time to the city council regarding rate increases or possible rate designs?
Kristen Simeon with Finance. So as you recall, our last rate study, I think, was 2015, where they had, or maybe it was even sooner than that, I forget. But they had recommended 3 rate increases at 3%. We'd only done 2. We've still held off on the third rate increase of 3%. So with adding these big projects between septic to sewer and this project, I mean, septic to sewer shouldn't be too much of a issue, but we may go out for another rate study, you know, so that we could come up with a plan of how we would phase that in.
All right.
But they had, like I said, when we did the RO, it was gonna be 3% increases. We only did 2. We didn't do the third one. And it was on both the water and wastewater with the information they knew from utilities providing their CIP plans at the time.
Will this information and some sense of this board, from what you've heard, when you go, either one or both of you, before city council on this matter, will you have an opportunity to share some of that there is expertise on this
Yes.
board?
Yes.
That we have an interest in this particular, and I don't want to get sideways politically with them about, oh, we want to go out for an outside party. There's a lot of things to recommend that, but we are here, and we could be a useful resource, I think.
Very much.
Maybe in a way of taking some of the pitchforks and torches by having open work session on a matter, on the pricing.
Yes.
Okay,
And
Any other
we will make it a
comments?
point to.
thank you. Any other comments from the board?
Move to adjourn.
we have
There is,
one more
there is
item.
another public, I'm going to open back
We
up
have
for
one more new business item.
new business or public comment?
No, we have a new business item.
Oh, the name, the plant name.
Yes, anybody have any ideas? Steve Leonard came to me, he wouldn't let him, it's his fault. The contractor out there was getting ready to make a sign to hang on the plant, and we said, whoa, wait a minute, we don't know what we're gonna call it yet. So, do you have ideas, preferences? City council probably will get to name it, but we wanted you guys to have the first bite at that apple.
Mike's in charge. I'm sorry, I have to leave.
That's quite all right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's right.
Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year to all of you, and thanks for being here.
Take care, Bill.
Happy New Year, Bill.
Thank you. See you guys.
Carry on.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted you to have an opportunity, and can they have a month to think about it, or do you need something right away, or?
Does staff have any suggested considerations for us to?
Yeah, not what was on the plans.
What was on the plans?
Yeah, I mean, as beautiful a project as this is and has been, I mean, yeah, that certainly describes it, but I think we could come up with something that, a little more fitting. I have to check, because city council actually has a standard for naming that they violated. So I don't know if they're sticking to their standard. They typically don't name things after people, but I've seen them violate that. So I need to check with Howard, but You know,
And how about our public relations department?
we could talk with Melissa about that. She's very, very good at that sort of stuff. So, we can, I can do a little more research on this and come back next month and tell you what we think city council would be interested in.
I would suggest if you have some considerations for us to consider at the
Yeah.
next meeting, get those to us a week or two before.
Yes, I will. I'll give you a little hint. If I were in charge of naming, it would be named after Mr. Harper, because
That
he's
would-
done the
that would be
most
great.
for this utility.
She was
But-
thinking the same thing.
Yeah. But the city council may not allow that, so.
Hell with them.
All right. That's all we had. No further comments unless, Bill, you have something you want to? Oh, okay. He's
Yes.
waiting for citizens' comments.
Any other staff or citizens' comments, Mr. Harper?
I normally just make one comment at this time of the meeting, and Cynthia's already received it. But first, I wanted to make a statement. If you read some of the history, Henry Street wastewater plant was put in the center of downtown. 1972 was the top AWT treatment plant in the state, recognized for several honors, publishing an effluent better than the Charlotte Harbor. And 1 year later, we were in violation of a law because they passed a nitrogen rule. The plant only lasted 11 years.
Sure.
And we were forced into going out to Cecil Webb where we are. That same law was rescinded, but then reissued and put Cecil Webb back in the same predicament as far as nutrients was concerned. We finally got that resolved, but I'm telling you, you have to watch out for history repeating itself. This plant process here gives us a better handle, in my opinion. I'm operational functional. I don't care about aesthetics or cost, okay?
Good point.
But I'm purely operational and functional. We've got the land to do what we need to, provided we get with GFC on the lease. Also, I wanted to answer another question. Cynthia brought up multiple plants around to serve different areas. We've already done that, been through that. We had a Section 15 package plant down on Burnt Store Road. We had a Section 12 package plants because that brand-new 1 million gallon facility was out of compliance the week it opened. The flows for the first week were 1.5 million in a 1 million gallon day plant. Majority of that, you've known over the history, was I&I. We've since tightened up the system and done all this stuff. But in the meantime, in a very short lifespan, we were forced to abandon and go outside, away from any conflicts, any problems.
And from my,
Guess what? One little rule on nitrogen drove us, and we were in, why do you think we're in deep well now instead of what the original concept was?
Sure.
Because the rules and the nutrients and the discharges and everything changed.
And from my experiences, the feds have flip-flopped over the course of the last 4 decades from centralized treatment to decentralized and then back again.
Back, and now they're back in a regional mode. This whole concept of Cecil Webb and our infrastructure was based on a regional service area, which includes, you know, the area around the city and what have you. The county failed to produce in some of the structure in the county-owned lands. But the idea of several package plants around and all, our infrastructure will not handle that anymore because of the way it's been designed with everything key to go to Cecil Webb. It's all in the history. Y'all have access to it, except one. As I normally say, people on this board are from somewhere else. That was said in the history, that was said by Vernon Peoples about political bodies. UAB is not a political body in a sense, but it's a body of educated people who have no institutional knowledge of local conditions. They don't know what's been going on. They don't know, they haven't been here. They haven't lived through it. So I decided to put it down as a history. And I come up with it. And anytime we have a new UAB member, they get the institutional knowledge of the utility system and the history
All right.
to give them some understanding of terms. You look at all those drawings, RAS, all this, the acronyms are in there. You want to know the history of the grizzle fig, it's in there. You want to know the history of the different plants and the problems each one run in, it's in there. Enough said. Thank you, gentlemen.
Very good, Mr. Harper. Thank you.
Oh, I got one back.
And Paul, there will be a quiz next month.
Oh, okay. I'll be ready.
The football games over the New Year's get boring. Now you have something to do.
But really, Bill Harper has done an excellent job putting all the history and everything that's put the Punta Gorda water and sewer system together.
I sense that.
Yes, Tom?
We have nothing further.
Any other citizen or board comments?
On December 15th, I got a memo. I'm going to stir you up a little bit, Chris, but I got a memo from Chris regarding a recommendation on the alternative systems such as STEP. I don't know if there has been further communication between you and Chris on that, but
I don't think so, but I can certainly tell you what transpired.
I'm interested in
Yeah.
whether or not you saw Howard's December 16th memo to the city council, which followed that up. He sent something to city council
Yes.
and the city manager,
Yes. In
clerk.
addition to that, now, and again,
I haven't seen that memo.
Chris had asked when the change in your recommendation was going to be an agenda item on the city council, and I passed that on to Howard. I don't get to make agenda items for the city council. I make recommendations for them, but it's ultimately Howard's decision at the end of the day. So rather than do it as an agenda item, he took the minutes from your meeting with the discussion, changing your position based on Chris's research and analysis, along with his memo, and provided that to each of the city council, as well as during his one-on-one briefings for the last meeting, he discussed it with each and every one of them and discussed the implications and what that meant.
I'm glad to hear he discussed it because,
Yes.
relating to my previous comments on communication between the boards.
Yes.
I was a little bit concerned when I read this. It says, and it's only 3 or 4 sentences, so the Utilities Advisory Board changed the recommendation for a gravity system to consideration of an alternative system such as STEP and not to be so definitive on gravity. It really doesn't change anything. That kind of sparked my interest, because I'm wondering,
Well,
what
he
exactly.
meant- and I
Let
know
me
what-
finish. Hang on.
Sorry.
It really doesn't change anything at this point, since the design of septic to sewer will consider all alternatives and recommend a type of system at that time. Part of our big concern was the fact that we didn't get all alternatives considered well enough, and the expense that would have been by the gravity system as opposed to what we were looking at with STEP was something that we were quite concerned with and something that related strongly to our recommendation. In addition, this is Howard again now. The Charlotte County Commission will eventually be the ultimate decision maker because in order for any assessment to be placed on the tax roll, like Buckley's Pass, the commission will have to agree to assess the properties. So I understand it's got to come through the county because it's assessed, but the city has a strong role in how this money gets spent too, and it's it's of great concern, I think, to this board and to the city of Punta Gorda that we, bear down on this and be sure we get all proper consideration of the concerns of this board mentioned to city council, and that the city manager as well knows the importance of what we're considering, and that he doesn't, which he sort of seemed to do here, and, forgive me, but I think he kind of poo-pooed our concerns to tamp down any concerns that the city council might have, and I understand the management of boards and how that's necessary sometimes, and I know you manage us sometimes, and Howard has to manage the city council, and the information that you get and give makes a difference into what all that would be. But this seemed important enough to bring up and something that, we needed to have out right on the table.
Absolutely.
Well, Howard had told me that we have no power in a meeting I had with him, which has gone a long way to my decision not to stay on the board. In terms of what he says in that memo, it's totally disingenuous.
Yeah,
What I
yes, it
did
does.
was an engineering economic study of the two alternatives, and the gravity system on a present value basis was 2.4 times as expensive as a step system. Ergo, it fails. And so, but what Jones Edmonds had done is they had played games by saying free money for gravity, but not for step. And that way they jiggered around the economic analysis. In my opinion, it was fraudulent. And I thought about going to the state's attorney with it, by the way. So this memo does nothing. We still, based on a solid economic analysis, which received no criticism from anyone, which I ran by outside people who know this stuff before I put it before you. We recommended that the economically superior alternative was step. Since then, now we have Howard's memo, oh, no decision's been made. I'm sorry, they put a decision in front of us, and it was gravity or step. They gave us numbers on the alternatives, which were jiggered, and we selected gravity. Upon further examination, we realized those numbers were jiggered. We changed our recommendation, and that change should go to the city council. And that's, Howard's memo does nothing.
Well, from my perspective, I think this board has done its job and said, hang on a second, let's go ahead and look at all alternatives, let's explore the cost further. And that's what we've done, and that's what's gonna happen.
And we want to be sure we get the proper communication, that communication to council.
The next step, in January, this item will go to the county commission for their consideration. If they follow suit and say, yes, they will assess our customers in the county, it looks like they will be assessed $11,000 apiece. It behooves us as a utility and as a board of a utility to look at the most cost-effective way to build that, given that we're gonna have to make up the difference. We're assessing them $11,000. Now, we're gonna certainly apply for grant funding, we're gonna apply for any monies that are available to go towards this project. But it makes the most sense to get the most feasible and financially responsible project. That will come at the design of the project, which you folks will be involved in, just as CDM presented their recommendations, and then the preliminary design, they'll be back with that, they'll be back with the final design. I envision the same thing happening with septic to sewer, just to give you a next step, sort of.
Thank you, Tom. Any other citizen or board comments? Being none, solicit a motion to adjourn.
Move.
Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? Meeting adjourned.
Happy New Year.